We are tracking potential tropical cyclone 16 as it's expected to pick up speed towards the Gulf Coast this weekend. Our team of meteorologists is live here on Tracking the Tropics with what you need to know for Saturday in Florida, but also Georgia, Alabama, and the Carolinas. Hey there, everybody. JB Buno here with you live on Tracking the Tropics, being joined again from another meteorologist at WKRG in Mobile, Alabama. This time it's Chief Meteorologist Ed Bloodsworth. But as always, we're going to start with a focus here on Tampa Bay and the rest of the Florida Gulf Coast, beginning with Storm Team 8 meteorologist Amanda Holly joining us there at the weather wall. Hey there, Amanda. What are we looking at here with potential tropical cyclone 16?
Well, we're certainly looking at some impacts to at least the first half of the weekend along the Gulf Coast. We're talking about rain, wind, as well as the threat for some isolated tornadoes and storm surge in certain parts here. But this is what we're looking at, potential tropical cyclone 16. It's very disorganized, but starting to become a little better organized from about 24 hours ago. It's going to pick up speed. Right now, it's only moving north at about 8 miles per hour, and maximum sustained winds there, you can see 35 miles per hour. So we're not to tropical storm status, and we're not even a tropical depression just yet either, and that's because we don't have that closed area of circulation. So we're still talking about a ragged area of showers and thunderstorms at this point, but the National Hurricane Center has enough confidence that this storm is going to develop into a tropical storm before it moves onshore sometime this weekend, early Saturday morning. Here's the track. The naming system, the PTC 16, this allows the National Hurricane Center to issue watches and warnings for the coastal areas that will be affected, as well as issue a cone for us to be able to show you where this is going to head. So here it is. This is the cone as of 11 a.m. and we're talking about impacts to the Florida Gulf Coast here sometime early Saturday morning. We're going to start to see impacts early Friday, but we are going to see impacts lingering into Saturday as well. And you can see the icon here. That's a tropical storm icon. So again, National Hurricane Center has enough confidence that this is going to develop into a tropical storm here before it moves onshore. And you can see the cone is not very wide. That's because we do have pretty good confidence on this one, on where it's going to go. But it starts right at the Florida border there in the Panhandle and moves all the way over to the Big Bend, just east of Tallahassee there in the Apalachicola Bay. 8 a.m. Saturday. This is this line right here, maximum sustained winds at 50 miles per hour. So inland, that's inland, and it will have weakened just a little bit. But 8 a.m. Saturday here, we're already talking right now. It's 2 p.m., just about 2 p.m. on Thursday afternoon. So 48 hours from now, we're talking about the storm system kind of moving onshore and continuing up the southeast into Georgia, into the Carolinas, and then back out into the open waters of the Atlantic. So a fast-moving system here, does not have a lot of time to get organized before it moves ashore, which is good news for us because it doesn't have a whole lot of time to organize into a stronger tropical system. So here's the forecast models for potential tropical cyclone 16. You can see there's pretty good confidence on where it will go for the most part, especially up until about Friday evening. And then we have a little bit of spread here, but the more confident models here, the more reliable models that we look at, kind of cluster it in the Florida Panhandle there, just west of Tallahassee. So this is going to bring rain. It's going to bring wind impacts to the Panhandle of Florida. We have tropical storm watches and warnings in effect. The orange here, that's a tropical storm watch, a tropical storm warning. And then the yellow, which is a little bit farther away, that's a tropical storm watch. So we're talking about the potential to see those tropical storm conditions beginning within 48 hours for the Panhandle. We also have storm surge watches in effect as well. That's from a portion of the Florida Panhandle there all the way down to Clearwater Beach and St. Pete as well. So that is going to something that we're going to be watching here for the Tampa Bay area, because storm surge amounts upwards of 1 to 3 feet, maybe a little higher, maybe upwards of 5 feet, depending on the timing of the storm and when that high tide is. Of course, those water levels all depend on the timing of the system. So a storm surge watch in effect for the Nature Coast up through the Big Bend and into the portions of the Florida Panhandle. And that's because we're going to have those onshore winds being on the eastern side of the storm. This will also be the wetter side of the storm, as well well as where we will see the threat for isolated water spouts moving ashore in some of those stronger bands, something we're going to keep an eye on heading throughout the next few days, in the next 48 hours, really. Here's the potential to see tropical storm force winds. Highest chance right now is kind of aimed at the Tallahassee area, Panama City, not West Palm Beach, Panama City there, maybe Mexico Beach there, where we were just talking about that last week. And then as you head farther to the south along the west coast of Florida here, Tampa Bay, we have a low chance of seeing those tropical storm force winds. Just a low chance at this time. And then as you head farther west as well into the northern Gulf Coast, a low chance to see those tropical storm force winds as well. So obviously something that will organize relatively quickly here over the next couple of days. But the bottom line is that we're going to see an increase in those rain chances in the northern and northeastern Gulf Coast heading in through Friday and into Saturday. This is a quick moving system. So by Sunday, we're going to be drying out, and you're not going to know that, you're not really going to realize that a tropical system was there on Saturday because of how dry we will be on Sunday, especially for portions of the Florida Panhandle and portions of north central Florida as well. So that's kind of the bottom line, the logistics of the system. Regardless, we are going to see that tropical moisture increase. We're going to see the breezy, the gusty winds at times, and the potential to see isolated water spouts moving ashore, especially in those coastal areas in some of those stronger rain bands. That's the bottom line. I do want to send it over to Ed right now because he's going to talk a little bit about the impacts that they're expecting there, in the specific impacts that they could see, especially up in Pensacola, right along the edge of the Panhandle of Florida.
Thank you, Amanda. Really appreciate it. I want to bring in Ed Bloodsworth, Chief Meteorologist, WKRG. Thank you to Amanda for the update there on potential Tropical Cyclone 16. Ed, as far as the impacts, we're talking about the Panhandle again. We're talking about our friends in Tallahassee, Panama City Beach, very, very close to the 1-year anniversary of Hurricane Michael. We're also talking about Pensacola, maybe near you in Mobile. What are we looking at as far as this storm closer to your neighborhood?
Well, this is the reason why we always tell folks that in the month of October, we still need to closely monitor the tropics, because you can clearly see there with the sea surface temperatures, there is still a lot of warm water in the Gulf of Mexico, 84, 85 degrees. And again, this tends to be the most favored area this time of year for tropical development here. In terms of impacts, local impacts for our area with regards to this potential tropical cyclone, it does appear that conditions will likely start to deteriorate tomorrow evening and then into mainly the first half of the day on Saturday for us here. And you can see the official forecast track really kind of zeroing in on the western Florida Panhandle as an area of potential landfall. And within that actual cone of uncertainty, it actually does include several counties in our viewing area as well here. But again, as Amanda was mentioning, it's a very disorganized system, not yet a tropical depression or subtropical depression. So again, but the Hurricane Center does believe that it's going to likely form into a named system, the next name being Nestor. But it's kind of being, a lot of factors are actually inhibiting this thing from any kind of rapid development. As Amanda mentioned, there was a cold front that actually moved through our area, which actually brought us some fairly chilly temperatures this morning. But as this starts to interact with that front, that's going to kind of inhibit this. There's a lot of wind shear in the Gulf of Mexico, but at the very least, though, with that strong southerly flow along the Gulf Coast, we're really going to be concerned mainly about some higher wind gusts. Some of our models are indicating 50 to 60 mile per hour wind gusts, depending on exactly where the center does come ashore, but also the threat of some areas picking up several inches of rain, which, again, not necessarily a bad thing for this area, because we are in the midst of a severe drought right now here. So this rain could prove to be beneficial. Unfortunately, though, it is going to coincide with the weekend. A lot of folks want to get out, but thankfully it's going to be a very quick moving system, and hopefully bring in some much needed rain for this area. But coastal flooding, there's actually a coastal flood watch that extends from southern Louisiana all the way to Apalachicola, Florida here. So there will still be some water rise even outside of that storm surge watch that Amanda just showed. So higher than normal tide activity. So low-lying areas along the northern Gulf Coast need to be wary of rising water as we head towards Saturday night and into, or I'd say Friday night and into Saturday morning.
As Amanda Holly here joins us again in the Stream Center, good to have everybody here with us on Track in the Tropics. I know that we are broadcasting to a large, sizable audience. A lot of you out there want to know how this is going to impact your weekend plans. And guys, we're talking about the weekend specifically, whether this is Tropical Storm Nestor or whether this is a storm of lesser strength. We're talking about this really primarily impacting the Gulf Coast on Saturday, and it's Sunday. What do you think, Amanda? It's probably going to be pretty nice around here, huh?
Yeah, this system is going to take off, really, and head for the Carolinas on Sunday. And really, Sunday afternoon, it's going to actually be out over the open waters of the Atlantic. So impacts Sunday will be non-existent. We're going to be a lot drier heading into Sunday afternoon.
And Ed, as far as Saturday goes, this is still a pretty scattered storm. We just saw the infrared satellite there, and it's there. I mean, the track looks pretty narrow, but the system itself kind of all over the place, right?
Yeah, that's a good thing to note here, that even if when we have a landfall, which would be expected there sometime on Saturday morning, it's a very lopsided system, as you mentioned. The wind shear, you'll notice all of the really deep reds, the convection is to the west or to the east and northeast of the center. So even before the system actually makes landfall, there are still going to be impacts felt early on. Namely, tomorrow, at least for the Gulf Coast, you're going to start to see the cloud cover thicken up. And then during the late afternoon and early evening, that's when we'll start to see the initial rain start coming in to the Gulf Coast, well ahead of a landfall here. So a very lopsided system, as you mentioned. And again, this may not be a purely tropical system. So whether they call this a tropical storm, subtropical storm, whatever the naming is, the impacts are going to generally be the same here, with water rise, the threat of isolated tornadoes there, with some of those bands coming ashore. Heavy rain, I think we're forecasting somewhere, again, depending on the actual location of the landfall, 2 to 5 inches of rain, maybe a little bit more in isolated spots. And again, some of our forecast models are showing wind gusts anyway, certainly in the mature tropical storm force range. We're talking 50, 60 mile per hour gusts, especially along the coast as it moves ashore.
Yeah, so as far as where we're looking at this path, and I know you both talked a little bit about it and where we're talking about a potential, landfall again. We're talking about the Panhandle, you guys, right? I mean, this is 1 year from Hurricane Michael. Ed, I know you've done a series of reports on the Panhandle talking about the devastation there. We've had our Daisy Ruth. We've had others here at WFLA check out that area on the Panhandle, and that they are still very much rebuilding over there. Guys, maybe you could just talk a little bit about the rainfall totals here. How much is that going to impact an area that was already impacted significantly by Hurricane Michael? Maybe, Amanda, if you'd like to start.
Yeah, so this system's going to be fairly quick moving, so it's not going to have a lot of time to dump a lot of rain, but we are still talking about, inches of rain falling in a short amount of time. It is a tropical system. They are good at producing heavy rainfall in a short amount of time, especially because Panama City area, Mexico Beach will potentially just be on the eastern side of the storm, so they are going to be on what we usually call the wetter side of the storm. So there is a good chance that we could see some localized flooding in some spots. I think the bigger story, though, with the Panhandle is going to be wind with this storm because of, certain debris still just kind of lingering around in certain areas and some of those houses that people haven't gotten to yet. I think that's probably going to be a bigger story.
Yeah, actually, JB, and actually Amanda just made mention to that, because when we were watching the reports from last Thursday was the actual 1 year mark since the storm. And I was there 6 months after the storm, and I still saw a lot of, in all that video, a lot of buildings and structures that looked exactly like they did when I was there 6 months ago here. So there is still a lot of debris scattered about in downtown Panama City, certainly in Mexico Beach. I mean, they've certainly made a lot of strides since then to recover, but there is still a lot of loose debris just everywhere. And once you get any 60 mile per hour wind gusts here, it's not out of the question. You could be looking at some, flying loose pieces of debris. It's certainly something you have to, certainly watch out for in this kind of scenario. But again, the good news with this is it's not going to be as slow moving as Michael was. This is going to be a very quick moving system, not nearly as strong. And we're not going to see any rapid intensification of this system as it moves through the Gulf like we saw with Michael. Just the environmental conditions right now are not that conducive for explosive development. So is this going to be a hurricane when it comes ashore? No, it's not looking that way at all. Likely a weak tropical storm, but again, some good wind gusts coming through. And you can see the onset. We'll probably start seeing tropical storm force wind gusts tomorrow night. After sunset, they'll start moving into the coast, and then they'll start spreading inland during the overnight hours and into Saturday morning.
Ed's been on this show so many times, I think he already knows the question I was going to ask, because the question I was, of course, going to ask was whether or not we had any chance of this reaching Cat 1 status as a hurricane. Ed, you're saying pretty confident that it's a no right now.
No, and look at the satellite, actually. You can actually sort of see, one, how lopsided this is. But if you look over central Texas, you can actually pick out a little swirl there over central Texas. That's the upper level trough that this is going to be interacting with. And when you get that an upper level low near an actual tropical system like this, that really helps to inhibit the development here. That's why you see all the clouds blowing off to the north and east here. And in a perfect scenario for development, you would like to see all of those thunderstorms co-locating around the center, wrapping around the center, and the pressure's deepening. That is not what we have with this. There is a lot of wind shear over the Gulf of Mexico. Also, the system is actually interacting with a front. You can sort of see that shield there south of New Orleans. There's a frontal boundary sitting in the northern Gulf right now. The same thing that moved through our area that gave us some cooler temperatures this morning. So it's interacting with the front, which actually makes me think here, and Amanda can maybe chime in on this. If there's a front nearby, and if they deem that this thing is interacting with the front, they may go ahead and classify this as more of a subtropical system later today or tonight.
Yeah, and the discussion the National Hurricane Center was talking about, this is a complicated scenario because of all those things that Ed just described. That stalled frontal boundary that's sitting in the Gulf of Mexico right now, there's likely going to be an area of low pressure that develops along that. And the National Hurricane Center doesn't exactly know which area of low pressure is going to be the main one, and the other one, the second one, will likely be absorbed into it, and whichever one is the main one will be the definition of tropical or subtropical. If it's the low pressure that develops along the front, it's going to be subtropical. If it's the low pressure that's kind of starting to develop in the southern Gulf of Mexico, it will be more of tropical origins. But as soon as this system moves on shore and interacts more with that upper level trough that Ed was pointing out over Texas, it's going to become extra tropical. But all of that is just names. In terms of impacts, we're still going to see the same impacts heading into the weekend.
And it should be a wet Saturday here on the Gulf Coast. Where exactly we're going to see most of that precipitation remains to be seen, but we're going to be back here live on Track in the Tropics in 24 hours from now, or actually about 23 and a half hours from now with again, our team of meteorologists here, including Storm Team 8 meteorologist Amanda Holly and other meteorologists from across the southeastern United States. Again, Track in the Tropics is streaming usually on Wednesdays, but when we have a normal or actually an irregular broadcast to bring you, we actually have something to talk about. We're bringing it to here live on special editions of Track in the Tropics. So for Chief Meteorologist at WKRG in Mobile, Alabama, Ed Bloodsworth, and Storm Team 8 meteorologist Amanda Holly, I'm JB Buno here in the Stream Center in Tampa, Florida. We'll be back at 1:30 Eastern, 12:30 Central tomorrow, unless we have more to talk about here with Invest 96L as we continue to track this system and what it means for your weekend here on the Gulf Coast. Everybody, thanks so much for being with us. We'll see you soon. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching Tracking the Tropics.